Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pinche Gringo Show. I'm Dan DeFossi, the Pinche Gringo, where the word pinche really means assistant to the chef. Julian has the night off tonight, but we have a big show for you tonight. We will be joined by U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Christopher Landau, live and unplugged. But first, if you've been preoccupied this week with playing Animal Crossing or drifting the days away in your pool in Cocoyoc and haven't been tuning into the news, here is a rundown of what's been happening. Last Thursday night, during the airing of this show, an estimated 200 peaceful demonstrators ascended on the U.S. Embassy to silently protest police brutality and the recent death in Minneapolis of George Floyd. Said one protester, shh. Reports did not state how many librarians were in the crowd, but I bet there were many. Then on Friday, a huge demonstration of probably the same amount of people who actually watched this show, un poquito, rocked Reforma and Polanco by marching from the U.S. Embassy to the government house of Jalisco, leaving a path of destruction along the way. Over 50 storefronts were destroyed while transit police stood by, using their incredible skills of extending their hands and moving them rapidly to keep the protesters moving. I wonder what transit officers can do outside of work with this new skill. And if you have an idea, share it with us on the comments or send us an email at pinchegringoshow@pgbbq.mx. The best answer, we're going to send you a free sandwich right on us. The group spray painted different messages on roads and buildings, including this one. Residents of Polanco decried, "That's not fair. I haven't been to the beach in 3 months. Of course I'm Blanco." I've been called a lot of things in my time, güero, gringo, pinche gringo, but never Blanco. It's definitely a new one. But on to news that you're either exhausted to hear or you've just given up talking about: COVID. The situation in the city is not getting any better. Every night at 7 p.m., we grab a martini, sit on our couches, and watch smashingly good-looking silver fox Hugo Lopez-Gatell tell us we're almost peaking, but not yet. Maybe in 5 days, reminding married women everywhere exactly what she hears during her once-a-month sex with her husband. Honey, give me 5 minutes. I'm about to peak. The health ministry last week announced a streetlight system to alert residents in a simple way the status of each state in the crisis. Mexico City is now in a red light situation, signifying that people still need to quarantine and not go outside of their homes. For more reaction on this, we go to Pinche Gringo Show correspondent Dan Godshall with his reaction on how it feels to be living in a semáforo rojo. Dan?
Bad.
Thanks, Dan, for your report. Just this morning, it was announced that the entire country will stay in red light until at least June 21st, except for Tamaulipas. Darn you, Tamaulipas, you marginally safer place. I think it's now time to take a holiday in Ciudad Victoria. But there's something I don't understand. Does the government think that we can actually be cautioned by a red light? Everybody knows red lights in Mexico City are just a suggestion. We look left, we look right, and if there's no COVID around us, we keep going. The government should institute a system with something that Mexico is terrified of: an angry mom. That's right, levels of anger. Green signifying, I'm proud of you, mijo, for spending all day on Sunday with us. Yellow is when you forgot to give her back her Tupperware you brought to a party. And red is a mom's reaction after her accomplished 40-year-old unmarried son tells her he got a tattoo and he's moving out. That would scare anyone into definitely wearing and behaving badly. And that's our series, No Manches. No manches. In world COVID news, New Zealand earlier this week declared that it was completely COVID-free, with no new cases reported for over 2 weeks. Foxy Vixen for New Zealand standards, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, or as Mexicans call her, Jacinda Ardern, stated that when she heard the news, she did a little dance. Congratulations, New Zealand. Put on a pair of wool socks, celebrate with a meat pie, some rugby, and delicious pavlova. But please be aware, my love, that number one, there are more sheep than people. And number two, if I could slice Mexico from the US and Guatemala and move it to 1,000 kilometers into the Pacific Ocean, could Mexico be COVID-free too? And those are our top stories of the week. And now let's move on to our next segment, No Manches. No Manches, a woman in Naucalpan in Mexico State, nicknamed by social media as Lady Pizza, reacted violently upon learning that she would not be served by a Little Caesars pizza, as she was not wearing a mask nor following preventative measures against COVID. After punching the window and security guard, she eventually left the store empty-handed, shouted Little Caesar, "Pick on someone your own size." No Manches. It's true what they say, some stuffed animals do have all the fun, as only a few days ago they had their temperatures checked and were permitted to ride a roller coaster in San Diego, albeit during COVID. I feel that we knew that was going to happen back when we had a room full of teddy bears and beanie babies. We close our door for a split second and they're off having a party on a roller coaster. Well, bad timing, guys. We're in a global health emergency. And you're all off partying without masks nor practicing social distancing. For shame, Teddy Ruxpin and Cabbage Patch Kids. No Manches. Recently, researchers in Israel discovered ancient cannabis in a 3,000-year-old shrine. The previously unidentified organic material cemented on limestone was confirmed after new analysis. Suspected of having been used during religious ceremonies, this finding offers new insights about how ancient Israelites lived. The ancient pot was believed to be abandoned once religious revelers learned that they had run out of papyrus. Frankincense, an Xbox 360, and fossilized Doritos were also discovered on the scene. No Manches. Hotels in Italy really let their creative juices flow with this one. As a means of encouraging tourists to return to the beaches of Modena, hotels are installing glass cubicles on the beach to protect you from sunbathing possible COVID-infused neighbors. This is really inside the box thinking, nothing like having your family melt under a magnifying glass of graffiti and lost cat posters. Dove se trova mi cat? Mamma mia. I mean, the beach is the #1 place you go to seek freedom, not to make a collect call from a 2020 phone booth. Prove me wrong, Italia. Prove me wrong. No Manches. Our main story tonight, a conversation with U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Christopher Landau. The ambassador was nominated by President Trump in March 2019, unanimously confirmed by the Senate, and presented his credentials to President Lopez Obrador in August. A graduate of Harvard Law School, clerked for Justice Scalia and Thomas, and argued 9 cases in front of the Supreme Court. His father, George, was U.S. Ambassador to Paraguay, Chile, and Venezuela, so he grew up in Latin America and speaks fluent Spanish. Ambassador, thanks so much for joining us on the show today. What a great jacket.
How are you doing? Great to see you, Dan.
I love it.
This is a hip place. You know, I got to look the part. I want your audience to embrace me and feel like I'm at least partially as hip as the show.
Ambassador, I wanted to start this conversation with complete sincerity. To be honest, many of us here in Mexico were extremely nervous about who would be appointed to represent this administration. But I've spoken to many people, American groups, people in government, journalists. People really like you. You've generated a lot of respect, and that's not easy these days, ambassadors. You have an incredibly robust and positive Twitter account with a lot of engagement, and I always joke around, you have more fans than the embassy itself. What's your secret?
How can you get mad at somebody in an Austin Powers jacket? That's what I want to know.
What's your secret?
You know, listen, the secret is I love my job. I really love Mexico. And I think the relations between our countries are so important for each of us. So, you know, I'm just glad to be here every day. You know, with the job as ambassador, you don't know how long it'll last. You serve at the pleasure of the president. So any day could be your last. So I really try to enjoy it to the full. And I think that shows. I've really enjoyed social media. You know, it's funny, before I got here, I didn't do any social media. I was a super boring lawyer in Washington. And I got here, I put up a tweet, and before I know it, I had 10,000 likes. I said, wow, there's a lot of power to this. And so it's just a great job. You know, it's challenging the way that families have disagreements. The U.S. and Mexico have disagreements, but you know, I think we're trying to work them out, and it's just a pleasure to be here. So I guess that shows.
That's great. There's been a lot of news lately. There were protests on Friday There were reports that the protesters were throwing Molotov cocktails over the fence of the embassy. What's going on? How do you feel about this? And are you worried about more protests happening in the future?
Look, I don't even like to use the word protest for what happened on Friday. I mean, we certainly had protests in past days, and certainly I can understand that. A lot of people were very upset about the George Floyd case, as was I. And, that's certainly a basis for legitimate protests and concerns. What happened last Friday, though, was a bunch of folks in black hoodies and anarchist flags showing up and just throwing a Molotov cocktail and stones at the embassy. Nothing penetrated the grounds of the embassy, thank goodness. It was a relatively small group. I certainly don't think that represents any significant segment of Mexican public opinion. But I think, as I indicated on Twitter over the weekend, it's very important to distinguish between lawful protests, which are not only permissible but are protected under our constitutional system in our country, and violent attacks on the embassy. So again, I think this was a relatively small minority of people, and I feel very comfortable and welcome in Mexico. The Mexican people have been very kind to me, and I think the people of Mexico, the vast majority, understand that given our ties of history and geography, that it's important to have a good and constructive relationship with the United States.
Absolutely. And it was pretty much in contrast to the protests on Thursday, which were largely peaceful.
Exactly. That's why I don't even think what happened on Friday, I like to use the word protest. I think that was a totally different animal, and it was more of an attack by vandals. And so again, that's why I think we got to be very careful with the words we use, not to blur that line between those two different phenomena.
Right. And there's been a lot of protests going on in the United States, in different cities. And I know there's a lot of viewers watching tonight that have family members that are living in the United States, and are largely, the protests are about the police brutality against marginalized or minority communities, and many people have family members are there. What do you say to the people to ease these fears?
Well, look, I think it's interesting. I was just reading the Declaration of Independence over the past few days because I've been preparing for the 4th of July. We're going to do a video and kind of a virtual experience this 4th of July for the American community. So by the way, this is a plug. We'll be putting out a video on the 4th of July. But I went back to read the Declaration of Independence, which I think is actually worth doing every once in a while for any American or anybody interested in the United States or really in politics. And when you read it, it's really about the same things that are at issue in the Floyd case. It's about human dignity and the relationship between the individual and the government, and how it's the government is a creature of the people, and it's there not to be the master of the people, but the servant. And I think it's very troubling when you see a video like the Floyd video where people in positions of power are abusing that power. I think for any of us who have the honor of having a government position, we have to consider ourselves, we have to recognize that we are public servants. We're here to serve the people, whether you're an ambassador or a cop or any kind of person in government. And to me, it was actually very inspirational to read the Declaration. And again, I think the peaceful protesters are certainly hearkening back to a long American tradition of tolerance and respect for the dignity of the individual. Obviously, there are a number of people in parts of our country who have crossed the line and gone into violence and looting, and that is not the American way. And I'm appalled by some of the images that I've been seeing from our country, and very saddened, to be honest with you.
Right. And it seems like a lot of times what happens in the US has really an effect around the world, and it's affected Mexico deeply. And as I was telling you on last week's show, that a lot of these protests are also very similar in themes to the Women's March that happened in March. when hundreds of thousands of women, marched down Reforma to demand equal rights.
Right. Well, again, I think that we've seen the same phenomenon when there's a lot of bona fide protesters who are lawfully and peacefully making their views known. But I remember at that time, there's also a minority of people who were, I think, frankly, anarchists, not protesters, and were taking advantage of the protests to go and just smash windows and loot shops. And I think that that's a real problem if, people can't distinguish between those two phenomena and they become intertwined. So, I believe strongly in the right to express your views in our country that's protected by the First Amendment. But again, you can't have vandalism and throwing Molotov cocktails. That's crossing a very important line.
Right. Let's switch gears a little bit. Talk about something that's slated to take effect on July 1st. And I don't even know, is it still coming into effect because of all of this coronavirus stuff? But the USMCA is supposed to take effect. And this has been a huge piece of legislation that is going to dramatically change the U.S. And Mexico relationship. Tell us, what are we, people in Mexico, going to feel most about this legislation when it takes effect?
Dan, I don't think that it will have an immediate, obvious impact on anyone's life. I think it's one of these things that is a very helpful backdrop for U.S.-Mexican relations. It's shocking to me as ambassador to read some of the accounts of my predecessors, their memoirs, some of their documents, and U.S.-Mexican relations were really quite tricky, really well into the 1980s. For most of the 20th century, they were really quite prickly. I think with the NAFTA agreement in the early 90s, the U.S. and Mexico have taken their relationship to a whole new level of economic integration. It's also been matched by cultural integration, social integration. I mean, the fact that you're here in Mexico is, I think, kind of a sign of the times that we have all these ties between our countries, and not just at the official level, kind of my job, but frankly, I think you are probably more of an ambassador, or just as much of an ambassador to Mexico as I am. And I think that's such a healthy thing for the relationship. I think it is very helpful and positive that both countries have ratified the USMCA, or the TEMEC as they call it here, by very, very lopsided legislative margins. So, this relationship is no longer a particularly politically controversial subject in either country, which I think is a huge development. I mean, NAFTA passed by the skin of its teeth 25 years ago, whereas the USMCA was approved in our country by basically 90-10 margins in the Senate and the House, and here in Mexico, I think virtually unanimously. And this is under presidents in both countries, President Trump and President Lopez Obrador, who came to office with a history of deep skepticism about the NAFTA agreement. So I think it's really a sign of the times in terms of how far we've come, that people on both sides of the border, I think, recognize that free and fair trade is really a win-win situation for both countries. And certainly I see a major part of my job here trying to keep promoting those economic and commercial ties that I think ultimately are what puts our relationship on a very solid foundation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just keep on thinking in my head right now that if I can go on Amazon right now and find that jacket, is it going to be cheaper and easier to get if I can get it with this USMCA, right? I think that's what most Americans in Mexico are preoccupied by. Right?
That's the beauty of this, right? I mean, just think, you two could look as cool as I.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally upstaging me with that jacket.
You have all the lighting, you have the makeup artist. I'm just here in my study at home, so I got to do something to spice it up. Besides, by the way, I didn't have a chance to thank all of my Twitter followers who I gave a shout out on Twitter last night or a few days ago that I was going to be on the show. and I got a tremendous response. I think it's great. Hopefully this means, Dan, that new fans will be discovering your show. You certainly have a new one in me. I liked your No Manches segment. And, you're kind of giving me a little bit of the hip side of life in Mexico City that I often don't get from my official cables and the reporting at the embassy. So
they don't say no manches and cables.
No, they don't.
That needs to change. We need to talk to state about that. Hey, listen, another question for you. You went to Harvard Law School in the late 80s. So my big question here is that, did you give Barack Obama a wedgie, or did he give you one?
I have to say, this is a little bit scary. I was actually 2 years ahead of President Obama in law school. So when I was in my third and final year, he was in his first year. I'm younger than he is, but by a little bit. But he was a first year student just as I was finishing up. I actually never met him in law school. He became president, or he joined the Law Review the year after I graduated. But Harvard Law School is an interesting place. There's a lot of smart people, not all of whom have a lot of common sense. I'll leave it at that. But I consider myself very blessed and privileged to have been given the opportunity to go there. And there are certainly, let me just say this: not everybody there is like Barack Obama. I mean, he was clearly a superstar even in that crowd. But again, it's education is a real blessing, and I count myself very, very fortunate.
So no wedgies.
No wedgies. Sorry.
No wedgies. Now listen, one of the secrets I think I've had about living in Mexico for 10 years is how much I really love the country and how much I really appreciate everything about the country. And I think that wears off. I mean, people feel it, right? And and I think you share the same thing. What do you love so much about this country?
Gosh, I find it endlessly fascinating, and I like actually the kind of ordinary lives of Mexicans when I have chances to experience that. I love here in Mexico City to go to the Mercado de Jamaica, where they have incredible fruits and vegetables as well as flowers. I still kind of have to pinch myself that I live in this place. I'm not just a tourist here for a few days or a week or so. And I love seeing new fruit, seeing the people who bring in the fruit, asking them where they got it from in the holiday season. Seeing all the piñatas there. Last Christmas time, I bought what I called the piñata más gigantesca de Mexico there. It was about, 7 or 8 feet tall. It was taller than I am. And the most fun part of that was seeing it come back on my black Suburban through the streets of Mexico City, like, tied to the top of the car, the piñata mobile. But, it's just experiences like that I love. Obviously there's many cultural experiences here. The Dia de Muertos, the whole month of October, I felt like I was in a fantasy land. It was so cool. All the cempasúchils all throughout, the marigolds all throughout Mexico City. I went to a cemetery that night of the Day of the Dead, and they're just experiences like that are really unforgettable, and I know I'll take to my grave. I'll always remember this very special time in Mexico.
Yeah, absolutely. And we hope that continues, and that we can have a Dia de los Muertos celebration. There's been so many Americans that have come down to the city and discovered the hidden gem that is this place. And we're hoping that people will start coming back, and when this whole thing is over. Now, something with that, I think a lot of people are preoccupied by what's happening in Mexico City, or in the entire country, that COVID cases are rising. We're not getting out of the red light. And do you foresee, if things get worse, that there will be a closing of the border and that we won't be able to fly back to the U.S.? Because it's been great that we are able to travel right now during this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, certainly flights, there's been no restriction on flights to or from Mexico by either government throughout this whole crisis. Obviously, given the sharp reduction in demand, the airlines have reduced the flights fairly drastically. I think we're somewhere maybe about 10% of the level of flights. But a lot of people ask me, are there any COVID-related restrictions on flights to or from Mexico? And the answer is no. If you can get a seat, obviously at the airport there are health checks, and you can't fly if you have any symptoms of COVID. And obviously I would hope that you wouldn't even think about doing that, because you'd be very infectious to other people. I would be, again, those decisions are made by the health authorities, not by me. But certainly we have come this far without that. And, I would like to think that we'll get through this crisis without imposing that kind of travel restriction. But again, you just never know. The situation can change dramatically. My sense is that it is not, we're not seeing the decline yet, which I was kind of hoping that we would be by now, by mid-June. But it seems like, we're going up somewhat steadily, but not dramatically. It's not, my sense is that we're not kind of seeing an exponential rise in cases, but I think we're at something of a rough plateau, albeit at a level that is higher than I think a lot of us would have liked. But I'm obviously on the land border, it's a different thing that we have restricted. Both countries have entered into agreement to restrict border crossings at the land border, which obviously involve a much greater volume of people. While the COVID numbers are what they are on both sides of the border. I'm hoping that we'll be able to restrict those, to lift those restrictions at some time soon. But again, that's not within my control, and that's the health authorities are looking into that. As long as there's pretty widespread community contagion on both sides of the border, it probably doesn't make sense to be encouraging more people to be traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. Ambassador, I would love to chat with you for another half an hour. We're running out of time. But what I want to say is that I think your jacket is going to be the star of the show today. Everybody's been commenting on social media on our feed about it. So take a picture of the ambassador, and I want you to use this hashtag ambassador jacket, because I think that's the coolest ambassador jacket that we've ever had in the history of this show and anything else. So ambassador,
if you can't be cool, you might as well dress cool. That's my motto.
And honestly, and I told you this before, sometimes I might be in a different political spectrum in terms of ideas, but I am very proud as an American here in Mexico that you are representing us here. And thank you very much for that, Ambassador. And thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, Dan, thank you for the invitation. Let me say I'm proud of you as an American citizen to come here to Mexico as an entrepreneur, to start a business out of nothing, and to really make it into one of the hubs of the American community here in Mexico, and have the show on. So it's really an honor and a pleasure for me to be on your show. Invite me back again. I'll take you up on it. Take care.
All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining us. Yeah. Ambassador
Bye-bye.
Christopher Landau, U.S. Ambassador to Mexico. All right. Now we turn to our lovely Pinche Gringo Show correspondent / Beyonce impersonator, Laila Garcia Mora, live from Querétaro, to give us the lowdown on what is happening this week at the Gringo. Hey, Laila.
How are you, Dan?
I'm good. You look lovely as usual, Laila.
Thank you for having me in your amazing show. And I want to tell you that Pinche Gringo is teaming up with Jack Daniels, and we're producing exquisite racks of ribs glazed with Jack Daniels and barbecue sauce to celebrate Mexico City's most deserving dads. Our clients can place their pre-orders from the June 19th to 21st weekend today through our WhatsApp number that's down here, and they can go also onto our website, pgbbq.mx, to order.
Amazing. I just can't think about, so Jack Daniels, how many ribs do you need to get wasted, Laila?
Well, I have to tell you that I made a trial, and for me, it was enough with 47 ribs.
47 ribs. All right. That's a challenge.
I'm a winner.
Yeah, listen, if anybody eats 47 ribs, we'll give you a free rib, right? People are cooped up in our homes, and it's sad because we were about to open up on Monday, but with the new news that now it's delayed to the 21st. So I guess this is the best moment to celebrate your dad at home. How can we do that?
Yes, and we would love that you include us in your celebration on Father's Day. And we've been working really hard to bring you the full experience of Pinche Gringo to your home. And you can be sure, our clients can be sure that we are also working. So when it's the right time, we can receive you at our home, at our sucursales, and everything's going to be super safe. But in the meanwhile, order from home.
Perfect. Right. And we don't have so much time left, but tell us, what does Pinche Gringo have scheduled for digital events this weekend?
Perfect. We have yoga session on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. with Candy Tomaso. We have comedy with Ritik Bhatnagar on Saturday at 8. On Monday night, you should connect to see our amazing manager of Patio, Eunice Romero, at the Meet the Pinche family at 7 p.m. And you can also remember to play bingo on Wednesdays. With every order that you make, we can include the bingo cards in your order, so you can connect on Wednesday at 8 p.m. and play bingo with us.
Great. Thanks, Lila. Thanks for the update. Be safe over there in the desert in Querétaro. Thanks for being on the show today. All right. Over the past few months on our podcast, we interviewed people from around the world to share their stories about how they were affected by the different government policies put in place to combat COVID. We wanted to check up on them to see how they're doing. We go tonight to Panama, Mallorca, Sydney, and of all places, Tajikistan, where interestingly enough, there were no reported cases of the virus until a few weeks ago. Take a look.
Hi, this is Matt McInnes reporting from Panama. Recently in Panama, we moved to a more relaxed quarantine with only an evening curfew. Cases went up, and now we're back to our restricted movements of 2 hours, 3 times a week.
Hi, this is Germán reporting from Mallorca, where the current measures allow people to just go out and do sports at any time of the day. And I would be allowed to go into the water, but I don't want to because 2 years ago they saw a white shark over there.
I'm Alex Gower, reporting from Sydney, Australia. We've been a little fast and loose with our lockdown, maybe. A lot of business open, but curve flattening nonetheless. Recession's still going to bite a little, but remote workplace is finally getting its myth busted. Cheers, COVID.
Hey, Dan and man, it's your boy here, Fred, reporting in from Dushanbe, Tajikistan. The last time we talked, there was no cases. Now there's over 4,000 cases of COVID-19 and 48 deaths due to it. Hit me up next time, man.
Amazing. A country that there were no cases reported. Now there's 4,000 cases. And so be safe over there, guys. Thanks for your report. And finally tonight, it's been a rough week here in Mexico with COVID cases rising. And we're only a few days away from what was supposed to be this magical June 15th, where a list of different businesses were supposed to reopen with restrictions, such as restaurants and offices. And I'm sure people are questioning if it's safe to do so while cases are rising. It's been around a month since Europe and some states in the US started to open. And last Friday, the US released its job reports with more than 2.5 million jobs added, specifically in restaurants, leisure, hospitality, and retail. We know that in Mexico, millions of people are relying on these types of jobs to provide basic needs for their families. It seems imperative for the country to reopen, but at what cost? I lost my dad in March at the beginning of this pandemic. I understand how every day between 400 and 1,000 families in this country feel when they lose a loved one. And this is the biggest dilemma of 2020. Governments around the world have taken extreme measures to infuse badly needed cash into the economy, investing billions or even trillions into supplementing lost salaries, offering assistance to small businesses, and bailing out larger companies such as airlines that have been devastated during this crisis. This government, however, has stayed the course. The New York Times published an article on Monday estimating that possibly 10 to 12 million Mexicans can fall below the poverty line, along with an economic contraction of 8%. The report also shared that AMLO, after being scarred from the 95 tequila effect crisis, believes government bailouts will line the pockets of the rich and would require Mexico to be indebted to foreign governments and institutions, something that has plagued other Latin American countries. And to support that, just this week, news came out that some U.S. businesses are taking bailout money while continuing to lay off their employees and paying out dividends to their investors. What we've learned from this pandemic is no matter how many scientists and economists weigh in on what to do, or how many opinions shared by our drunk uncle on a Zoom call, we really just don't know what's right or wrong. And I'm not here to tell you that either. I own barbecue restaurants. But in order to inform and strengthen our opinions, we must listen to both sides. We owe it to ourselves. And that's been lost in this time of polarization. We tend to retreat to those who have similar viewpoints because it's easy and it feels good. That's the purpose of this show. Our intent is not to join different sides, but to inform and offer different perspectives on the issues from a wide range of guests that are affecting both the US and Mexico in order to strengthen our relationship. This is what Pinche Gringo was founded on, and we hope to offer this to our viewers. That's our show for tonight. Please tune in next week on Facebook Live or YouTube. From all of us at Pinche Gringo, see you next week.
Pinche Gringo, Mexico is laughing thanks to you. We like to watch you dance salsa and listen to your bad Spanish too. We like to watch you almost die from spicy food.